Well, hello. And how are you doing today, Jerome? This is awesome. First of all, let me get started. It's kind of a takeoff of yesterday. Let me share the screen here. This is one of the Pharisees of the evolution movement, since it is a religion. And what we know is what we know. That's what Lawrence Krauss says, anyway. So the Pharisees of science, basically, who runs the world of science? I'm not myself. Get this set up. So the Pharisees of science, who runs the world of science, who enforces these rules and determines what is published. This guy. I also mentioned Dawkins. I'll get into him. They all go off of the early religiosity of Darwin. And then you have Lyell. And you have a lot of geologists before that. But what's happening now is who's running the directive. And this says a lot right here. So this was a South African physicist, George Ellis, on Lawrence Krauss. Says he is presenting an untested speculative theories of how things come into existence out of a pre-existing complex of entities, including variational principles, quantum field theory, specific symmetry groups, a bubbling vacuum, and all the components of the standard model of particle physics, and so on. He does not explain in what way these entities could have pre-existed coming into being of the universe, why they should have existed at all, or why they should have had had the form they did. And he gives no experimental or observational process whereby we could test these vivid speculations of the supposed universe generation mechanism. How indeed can you test what existed before the universe existed? You can't. And the problem with a Lawrence Krauss, a Dawkins, and then you start getting into the universities that hold the peer reviews and how these papers get peer reviewed is very, very interesting. Let's just put it that way. It's very interesting. There's a lot of favors that are done. There's a lot of slavery that's done. There's a lot of time that's put in, and there's a whole ton of bribery that is done, especially in major universities. So I'm going to share for you, Jerome, because I don't know if you caught it yesterday, but the basic fraud that's going on with the textbooks, as well as with there it is. So let me share the screen so I can show you. You have not seen this, but this was you heard of the long-term E. coli experiment that was going on. the evolutionary experiment. So hopefully you can see that. I don't know if I can blow it up a little bit or whatever for you, but let's see. Here, let's do that. So let's go to the top. So this is a solicitation has been achieved. Long-term research in an environment. I can't read the whole thing. I gotta scroll over here. In environmental biology, the LTREB is what the actual Science Foundation calls it. So it's a program solicitation. There's the number there, NSF 18-597. Then it replaces the documents of NSF 17513. And this is National Science Foundation, the Directorate of Biological Sciences, Division of Environmental Biology. Full proposal deadlines. They can be accepted at any time. So there's no real deadline for anybody to come up with money. And this is the really important thing. So a no deadline submission process is initiated. Program title, long-term research in environmental biology. Why environmental biology? Well, E. coli is a funny thing if you get it in too much in your body, because everybody has E. coli for their digestive system. And it's, if they overpopulate because of some sort of a sickness or illness, they can cause havoc on the body, and it's trouble. So that's why it's environmental biology. So the synopsis of the program is long-term research, and basically addresses important questions in evolutionary biology, ecology, and the ecosystem. So this is how they got in. So ecological research on marine populations, communities, ecosystems is not supported by the LTRB and should be directed to the biological oceanography program. Okay, so basically, if you're doing marine populations, you have to go to the oceanography program. So examples of the current LTRB, examples of the current LTRB awards can be viewed at the NSF website. The program intends to support decadal projects. So it's not just one decade, it's multiple decades. And we know that the funding is for an initial 5-year period, which is required. And there's a description of it. I don't need to get into that, but this is where everything kind of goes awry in this. So these are the directors and things like that. And you can go to their .gov, email them if you want. So basically, the anticipated type. The anticipated type of the award is a standard grant or a continuing grant. Well, it's a continuing grant because the estimated number of awards will be 10. Okay, because each award is $600,000. So it's 10 per year. Exclusive on new and renewal awards. So the anticipated funding amount, $6 million. And that is per year. And renewal awards. However, it's availability of funds, but they have the funds because it is the government. So eligibility information. Basically, the other thing is with their they can search other grants. So there are no restrictions and limits. There are no restrictions or limits. Number of proposals per organization. There are no restrictions or limits. And letters of intent are not required. Preliminary proposal submission, not required. So the full proposal submitted via the fast lane. And we get down here to budgetary information, cost sharing requirement, inclusionary voluntary committed cost sharing is prohibited. See? Indirect cost limitations are not applicable. Other budgetary limitations apply. Please see the full text. So there are limitations, but $6 million a year to look at some E. coli is pretty darn good. So let me go back over here to show you these textbooks. This is the average price. Let me scroll up here. So this is done by Words Rated, and has the K through 12 textbook sales statistics as of June 13th, 2023. So they only have 2022's numbers. So next year they'll have 2023's numbers. And excuse all these ads down at the bottom, but this is generally how government works. So over 5.61 billion, so let's just say 6 billion was generated in pre-K to senior year level, 12th year textbook sales revenue in the United States in 2022. In 2021, it was revenues grew by 16.63%, so 17% over 2021. But 2021 was a huge bounce back year for K through 12 because of the pandemic, and revenues jumped. I don't know how to get rid of these stupid ads. As revenues jumped by 25.3%, so one quarter over above the 2020 levels, which was during the pandemic. All right, so what do these numbers mean? So you got 5.61 billion, let's just say 6 billion in revenue. It's not in sales, it's revenue. And then you go to the pre-K. This is just little 4-year-olds all the way to your 17, 18-year-old adolescents. And if you look at the 2022, there's your 6 billion. And then I'll go over this other one. Let's see if this one pops up properly. Now you gotta stop screen. I have to switch over. And present it again. And then we're going to go to the college books. Isn't that fascinating? Shift save. Right, so let's go up here to this one. So college textbooks, same people, it's just a different page on the website. So college textbook sales statistics. Sales by year. So 2022, higher ed textbook sales in the United States generated over 3.18 billion. So let's say 4 billion in revenue. Okay, which was actually a decline of 1.24%. So a negative 1.24% over 2021, because college kids are getting smarter, getting used books. They know that they don't have to use new books. Some books cost as much as $400 for a class. So if you look down here, so if you include this $4 billion, the $6 billion that we just learned from there, that's $10 billion a year to put these evolutionary things into the books. Now, why is evolution put into the books? Well, evolution is put into the books because that is what the colleges want, because that's what's bringing in the money so that they can scam the government to get these government grants and other grants in the states and that they're involved in. Basically, what they're doing is they are switching the funds over so that colleges can make more money. And when colleges make more money, they can get more students. So not only are they making money off of the students, let's just say round it off $20,000 a year for 2 semesters. So $10,000 per semester. So August to the end of November, and then your start back up in late January after New Year's on until about May is generally the second semester. So you have $20,000 per student. Some of these schools have as many as 50,000 students. Some only have maybe 8,000 students, but the average college campus, determining if they have dorms or not, or if it's a community thing. But the largest one at one time was in Orlando. It's the University of Southern Florida. Is that what it was? One of them. Anyway, they had 62,000 students. So if you just take the highest number, 60,000 students, and $20,000 a year, I understand, but you also have to buy your own books, and that does include dorm fees and food cards and things like that. We understand that. However, this is how the colleges indoctrinate children, or schools with the children, and then our young adults go into college because they're away from their parents and they're learning things that they shouldn't have to. So let me stop that. And let's see, what is it here? Hey, Brother Timothy, what's going on? Sorry, I was giving my presentation on how we're being scaled back and how all this theft of money. And one of the things I forgot to mention is that when a school is getting a government grant, they have professional grant writers. So 9 times out of 10, they're going to get what they want from the government. And the government has to use all of those funds. There are no funds that are retained from one year to the next. So if you have $10,000, you got to get rid of the $10,000 before you go on to the next fiscal year for government grants. And this is how schools, I say schools as a collective, all the way from kindergarten to PhD level, which could be 8 years, medical level, things like that. But in these schools, we're taught, because we've all done the Kent Hovind thing, which I'll share that in just a second here. But we've all seen that our kids are being indoctrinated. And that is one of the reasons why I'm going to play this. It's not coming up. Oh, sometimes computers can be funny. Generally pilot error. Let's see. Yeah, there we go.
Hey guys, my neighbor just got a new Tesla. Let's go see
wait
what
for
she
the
says.
ad. Sorry.
I see you got a new Tesla, and not many people have this car because they're so expensive. So I'm curious, how much do you pay for this car? How do you?
Yeah, everything's got ads.
To go insane? Well, the Bible says the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. I think we're living in a time when just about the whole world has gone nuts. They believe they come from a rock 4.6 billion years ago. How dumb can you get? 2 Peter goes on to say, where is the promise of his coming? That's what the scoffers are going to say. For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. That's an important phrase. The scoffers are going to say, the way things are happening now is the way they've always been happening. Long, slow, gradual processes.
All right. Uniformitarianism. I'm going to interrupt here because this video was sometime in 2003, 2002, so 20 years ago. Kent Hovind's video, 20 years ago, and it's gotten progressively worse with lies in the textbooks.
Bible says the scoffers are willingly ignorant.
That's true.
Willingly ignorant. In the Greek, that means dumb on purpose.
So true.
They're willingly ignorant of how God made the heavens and the earth, and they're ignorant of the flood. The world was overflowed with water and perished. We cover more on that on videotape number 2 of our series. But one of the scoffers in the last days was a guy named James Hutton. Now, James Hutton lived in the late 1700s. James wrote a book and said the earth is millions of years old. Now, you need to understand, in the late 1700s, most people believed the Bible, or at least they were strongly influenced by Christianity, and everybody thought the earth was about 6,000 years old. That was the common teaching of the day. Okay? They taught the kids in the public school, God created the world in 6 days, like we saw earlier. But this was also a time of many revolutions. We had the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Polish, the Spanish, the German. Every country is just about revolting against the idea of a king and establishing a democracy. So they threw off monarchy, and this is known as the age of anti-monarchy. So the Bible says to honor the king, and some people thought the Bible was an obstacle to their political objectives, and they wanted to discredit the Bible. Keep in mind, this all happened in early 1800s and late 1700s. So back when everybody thought the earth was a few thousand years old, James Hutton came along and said, oh no, it's lots older than that. And it got here by uniformitarianism. Ooh, kids, big word, bold print. That'll be on the test. They always are, okay? Uniformitarianism means the present is the key to the past. No, James, I think the Bible's the only perfect key to the past. But during this time frame, the Christians, instead of fighting against this new teaching of millions of years, they swallowed it. The Christians accepted the idea of a gap theory or day-age theory or progressive creation. They just accepted millions of years right into the Bible when it's obvious to anybody with half a brain and one eye reading the Bible that it does not teach the earth is millions of years old. That's not what it says. So the Christians did not put up an effective defense, an effective resistance to this teaching, and they allowed the church to believe all this. And then when evolution came out, 1859 became popular with Darwin's book, well, the Christians just accepted that too. Boy, what a tragedy. That book covers the great turning point in history, if you like the history of stuff. Well, James Hutton's book that he wrote had a real strong influence on a young lawyer from Scotland named Charles Lyell.
I'm going to step in here. A lot of it had to do with these were very powerful, influenced people in England and in Europe. Basically what we had was the love of money stepping in. As we saw from the textbooks, you had $10 billion in 2022 that was revenue. That's across the United States, but there's only a few people that make the textbooks. I mean, there's just a handful, and they're all voted on by a certain California, Texas, have their own little, what do you call them? A quorum that vote for on what's going to be the textbook. But there's only a few textbook companies that actually put textbooks into the schools, and they control everything from the kindergarten to the graduate from college on all of these textbooks. So you got to understand that there's a lot of money to be made with textbooks. There's a lot of money to be made in evolution because of those government grants, like I showed you with the with the LTEE experiment, or if you want to call it the LTREB experiment, with Lenski and his E. coli, where $6 million a year. And I would find it very hard to actually spend $6 million a year on E. coli that produce every 20 minutes. And all you need is a petri dish and some beakers, a freezer, and a lab. Now, the lab is not rented because you're already a student at the school. Okay, so the students work for free. That's the other part too. So the assistants work for free because the PhD has to provide everything, but that's a whole different story of what goes on with that. But there's really no monetary because the assistant's trying to get to the PhD level. You understand what I'm saying? So there really isn't any paid. Yeah, you might get $100 a week, $400 a month, to spend, but it's not like a regular job where you're getting $20 an hour. So you're working towards this thing, and the end goal is so that you can change the world to make a ton of money by writing books and other types of things like Lawrence Krauss. Lawrence Krauss, not going to say he's dumb, but he's dumb on purpose in certain things because he knows the game. Richard Dawkins, the same thing. All of these PhDs that we see that come in from the evolutionary side are all gaming the system. And they lock out those that believe in God, and they don't give them the PhD, or they have them redo their dissertations 4 or 5 times, make it really trouble on them. But it's all about money. This is the big gambit of money, and the root of all evil is money. So this is it's very interesting how money has crept in. And this is why I think that's what happened. And this is what this video is about. But really, Kent Hovind doesn't mention that. But we'll carry
Charles
on.
Lyell, the lawyer, hated the Bible. Somebody calculated one time that if all the lawyers in the world were laid end to end around the equator, we would all be better off. Charles Lyell, in 1830, wrote this book right here, Principles of Geology. I've got it here on the table. You can come take a look at it. It's all marked up. In this book, you can see his hatred for the Bible kind of ooze off every page. He kept calling it ancient doctrines. He said, oh, you have a scriptural authority. He was mocking them, okay? He called it a religious prejudice. He said, men of superior talent, he's talking about himself, who thought for themselves and were not blinded by authority. He used every opportunity he could find to mock the scriptures. And kids, you won't have to go to college very far before you're going to run into a professor that has this mocking attitude toward God's word. How many of you had one when you went through school? Seems like their whole goal in life is to destroy your faith. I had a bunch of them when I went to school. They just wanted to destroy your confidence. Well, Charles said his goal was to free the science from Moses. What do you suppose he meant by that? Well, before Charles Lyell wrote his book, everybody looked at the geology, looked at Grand Canyon and said, wow, look what the flood did. He didn't like people interpreting Earth's history in light of the Bible. He wanted them to interpret Earth's history in terms of millions of years. Lyell is the primary guy responsible for inventing what today is known as the geologic column. How many have ever heard of the geologic column before? They divided the Earth up into layers and gave them names, Cenozoic, Mesozoic, Paleozoic, Archaeozoic, all that kind of stuff. Maybe you saw the movie Jurassic Park, named after the Jurassic layer, okay? Each layer of rock was given a name and an age and an index fossil.
Introducing Picasso. Picasso is second home co-ownership. Co-ownership is...
Now keep in mind, all this was done in 1830 before there ever was a carbon dating, potassium-argon dating, rubidium-strontium dating, lead-208, lead-206, uranium-235, uranium-238. None of those had even been thought of. So they didn't determine these great ages by any radiometric decay method. They just picked the numbers out of the clear blue sky. It's a fact the Earth has many layers of sedimentary rock. That is just a fact. You can see them all over Tennessee here. How'd they get there? Well, there are 2 interpretations. One group says the layers formed slowly over millions of years. The other group says, no, these layers are all from the flood in the days of Noah. And again, they're always trying to erase that line between the two and make their interpretation become part of the fact. And it's just not, okay? It's just their interpretation, that's all. The geologic column is actually the Bible for the evolutionist. The only place you'll ever find it is in the textbooks. It doesn't exist. This guy admits it. He said, if there were a column of sediments, unfortunately, no such column exists. Did you know there is no geologic column? If there was, it'd be 100 miles thick. It doesn't exist. It's one of the lies in the textbooks. And actually, all of evolution is based on this lie right here. This is one of the most serious ones, in my opinion. It's true the earth has layers. That's not the question. Okay? How did they get there, though? I mean, if that layer sat there for 10 million years waiting for the next one, don't you think it's going to rain once in a while in 10 million years? Why are there no erosion marks between the layers? Why are they stacked on top of each other just like a stack of pancakes? And by the way, why are there no soil layers between the rock layers? I mean, soil builds up on top of rock. Don't you think there'd be some soil?
I'll stop it there. This is one of the things that they can't explain, because there's no real years in between these layers. And yet we always debate with, there's no way that a flood could have covered the whole earth. The heat problem. There is no heat problem because it only rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and the rest of the water came from the middle of the earth. And people go, well, where's all the water that came from the flood? Well, it's still here. The mountains arose. And so anyway, the basis of the Pharisees that come in from the evolution side, they're in every single one of the positions of science. So whether it's in physics or it's in which mathematics is part of science, biology, cosmology, astronomy, it's all the same thing, because they have to do the distant starlight, and it makes no sense with the distant starlight from what we know about space now. There's actually some pretty good videos out there about how they falsified a lot of the space activity. I think that the Lunar Mars rover is out there in Utah or in Nevada somewhere. How does sunlight get to Mars? And there's no trees, there's no anything. It's like a barren desert, and yet they say that there is ice on Mars. It's just interesting to me how they can come up with all this through a telescope. And I've looked through the telescope back when you were able to do it in LA, especially Mount Wilson. If you go to Mount Wilson, they used to do tours, things. I think they still do. I haven't been there for a while. But you can look through the telescope, and they'll point it into some point in the sky. And, I know that they say that they've come a long way with the Hubble telescope. But when you're at Griffith Park Observatory and you're looking through the telescope, and you can see the moon, but you can't see onto the moon, right? It's just basically magnified from what you do looking up in the sky. And it's very interesting. I'm not a conspiracist. I just go off of what is revealed. So I thought I'd stop it there. I'm going to speed it up on this video a little bit, because the geological column's kind of where it fits in. That's their categorization of ages of the earth. So it has to be millions of years old. The dust settled over millions of years and created a rock. I'm trying to find this other video that I saw today. I'm going to play a little bit of that. So I'm going to carry on with this.
Soil built up once in a while? Mm-hmm. Look, if you get a jar of dirt and rocks and gravel and sand and mud and shake it up and set it down, it settles into layers for you in a few minutes. It doesn't take long. How many seen those things you buy at the mall with two pieces of glass and different colored sand in between? You flip it over and it makes all kinds of layers just in a few seconds. It doesn't take long. I was preaching years ago in Union Center, South Dakota. Now, Union Center is right there. It's not even on the map. And South Dakota puts everything they can find on the map just to kind of fill in the white places, Well, there were 40 people in the whole town. 38 of them came to church. Other two must have been pulling a calf, I reckon. I don't know. But boy, we had a great meeting, and the preacher said, hey, Hovind, let's go down to Rapid City. They've got a bunch of dinosaurs in the museum there. I said, all right, I like dinosaurs. Let's go. So we all drove down to Rapid City. We came to this museum, and a guide met us at the door. He said, hey, folks, would you like me to give you a tour? We said, that would be great, sir. Well, the first place we stopped on the tour was the geologic time chart. They have it lit up, and it's behind glass, and it's holy and sacred. Don't dare touch that thing, you know. So we're standing over there, and the guide said, now, folks, this layer of rock right here is about 70 million years old. And it's so cool because they always get that sanctimonious tone in their voice, you know, 70 million years old. Oh. Well, my daughter was 12 years old at the time. She raised her hand. She said, mister, how do you know that layer is 70 million years old? He said, honey, that's a good question. We tell the age of the layers by what types of fossils we find in them. They're called index fossils. And by the way, that's correct. That's what the textbook says. Scientists use index fossils to determine the age of rock layers. She said, thank you, sir. We walked around the other side. We're standing over here, and the guide said, now, folks, these bones are about 100 million years old.
They don't teach investing in school, and I think that's one of the biggest flaws of public education. Nobody teaches.
My daughter raised her hand again. She said, sir, how do you know those bones are 100 million years old? He said, well, honey, we tell the age of the bones by which layer they came from. She said, sir, when we were standing over there, you told me you knew the age of the layers by the bones, and now you're telling me you know the age of the bones by the layers. She said, isn't that circular reasoning? I thought, wow, a chip off the old block. That guy had the strangest look on his face. It was almost as if he were thinking. He looked at my daughter. He looked at me. I wasn't about to help him. I thought, wow, this is going to be good. I have got to hear this. He looked back at my daughter. He said, wow, you're right. That is circular reasoning. He said, I never thought of that before. That fellow drove 50 miles one way that night to come hear me speak in Union Center, South Dakota.
I'm going to stop it there and start another video. So the video is a little bit on the same lines of where the fossils come from, how old they are, and it basically allows us to really know that the truth is out there. It's just harder and harder to find. And that's it. Yeah, there we go.
The one thing I want to point out here, number one, because we've already talked about order of events, I want to emphasize after each day, God said it was good. And at the end, he said it was very good, right? And we read in Genesis 1:30 that animals and humans were eating plants. Okay, they were herbivores. Then, as we think about, because a lot of times when people talk about creationism, they just think about the creation week, but that's only one component to it. The fall is an incredibly important component, and the curse that goes with it. Because in Genesis 3, we read that humans rebel against God, right? Adam and Eve disobey God, and God puts a curse on Adam and Eve and the serpent, and it talks about a curse of the creation. It says that the serpent is cursed more than the cattle. It talks about the ground being cursed. The sin and death are introduced in Romans 5:12. We already talked about that verse. And so we know also from Romans chapter 8, you saw that Zachary read a little bit of that for us, where it talks about creation being under a curse and eagerly awaiting its redemption, its restoration. It's out there right now with pains of childbirth, right? And so part of that curse we read in Genesis 3 is the appearance of thorns and thistles. This is a fossil plant, a zosteraphil called Saudonia. It might be hard for you to see from back there. It's easier on my screen, but it's covered in thorns, okay? This plant is supposedly over 350 million years old. So we got to think about this. We can't just say, whatever, it doesn't really matter. No, it does matter. Truth needs to line up. So we can ask this question: when were most of the fossils made? So the first possibility is, were they made before creation? Well, that doesn't make any sense, okay? Because there was just God, right? So we can throw that one out immediately, okay? What about between, some people, let me phrase it this way. Some people want there to be a gap, right? They talk about that, like, God made the heavens and the earth, Genesis 1:1, and then they want a gap of time, and then all the rest of the creation event happens. And they say, oh, that's where you put the fossil record, right there. Well, the problem with that is what we talked about, Romans 5:12. Because for God to create all this and make Adam and Eve and says, oh yeah, it's very good, but they're sitting on top of this record of pain and disease and struggle, and it's incoherent, right? It just doesn't make any sense. And what would it be if Adam goes out there and he finds like a fossil of like, we find fossils of animals that are eating each other, like actively eating each other and got buried. He's like, what is that? Every animal I know eats plants, right? Like that would be really confusing for him. No, it doesn't make any sense. So let me show you some examples of fossils just to demonstrate to you what we're talking about here, okay? This is a pterodactyl called a Rhamphorhynchus. That's its head. You can see its eyeball right there, its teeth. There's its neck. These are its wings, okay? This thing is a fish, okay? It's called an Aspidorhynchus. There's his eye. There's his teeth. You can see the scales on his body. I'll give you a zoomed out perspective here of the whole fossil. That's pretty cool, right? From Germany, okay? This Rhamphorhynchus, his wing is pulled out of joint. It's really weird. The whole rest of him is put together, but just the wing is messed up. And his mouth is on what would be the wing membrane there, the wing, okay? So it looks like this thing is trying to eat this other thing. At bare minimum, he's hurting him, right? So is this something that we would expect to see before the curse or after the curse? This is after, right? Here's a fun example. This is a fossil bone. You can see all these scratches on them. See these scratches? This one in particular, you can see like little scratches that come out. These are tooth marks, okay? So dinosaurs, most your meat-eating dinosaurs had serrations on their teeth. And so if their tooth, as it was dragging on a bone, if it happened to turn sideways, all those little serrations would leave their own little grooves. That's exactly what you're seeing right there. And we know this from experience with Komodo dragons today. They would throw goat carcasses to Komodo dragons and then retrieve them afterwards, and they'd see all these scratches on it, so they could watch them feed and stuff. So this is a bone we found out in Wyoming. And we got this published, and of course it got media attention because it was a T-Rex eating a T-Rex. And so everyone's like, oh, T-Rex cannibalism. And you can talk about the most significant, important thing in the world, but if you say T-Rex and cannibalism in the same sentence, the media is going to jump on that, right? That sounds a lot more exciting. So we've got not only an animal eating another animal, we have an animal of the same species eating another one, right? That does not seem like something that would be in the good creation, right? That seems like a fallen creation. I would say that's after the fall, after the curse. Here's another example. This little guy, his vertebrae right here, it's really hard to tell where one bone starts and one ends. That's because he has arthritis, or had, he's dead, or she, we don't know. But this animal had arthritis at the base of its tail, and it's a reptile. So when it walks, its tail moves with it. So every time this thing walked, it was in intense pain. That doesn't seem like something that God would make and say, yeah, I think that's really good. I think they're going to like that. No, when we see animals suffering, it bothers us, right? This is bad. Here's another one. This is an ichthyosaur, marine reptile. Okay, so it's kind of like a dolphin. You see the flippers. There's another flipper right there. It's a long tail. This thing is a baby ichthyosaur. You can see the head right there. There's the body, there's the tail, little flippers. Okay, it's coming out of the birth canal. So these animals gave birth to live young. That's how we figured it out. And it's coming out tail first, not like human babies, right? We don't have tails to begin with, but human babies usually come out head first. Well, dolphin babies come out tail first because you don't want the baby to, drown in the water if there's a complication, if it takes a little bit of time. And so these animals are doing the same thing. That makes sense. It's a good design. But here we have a mother with its baby being killed. That doesn't seem like a good thing. That seems like something that we see as suffering. And so we'd say this is after the fall. So I don't think there's any fossils being made before the creation or between the creation and the fall. That doesn't make any sense. In fact, I'm going to quote to you from an old earth creationist, geologist, and evangelical pastor named Hugh Miller, who lived in the 1800s, okay? This is what he had to say in his book, Testimony of the Rocks. He says, I need scarce say, they used to talk like this, right? That the paleontologist finds no trace in nature of that golden age of the world, of which the poets delighted to sing, when all creatures lived together in unbroken peace and war and bloodshed were unknown. So he says, we find no evidence of an Edenic state when we look at the fossil record. He says, ever since animal life began on our planet, he's an old Earth creationist, there existed in all the departments of being carnivorous classes who could not live but by the death of their neighbors, and who were armed in consequence for their destruction, like the butcher with his axe and knife, and the angler with his hook and spear. And then he says this, but there were certain periods in the history of the past during which these weapons assumed a more favorable aspect than others, and never were they more formidable than in the time of the coal measures. What he's saying is, it was worse in the past. If you look at the Carboniferous layers, this is what he's talking about. He says, the animals were just nasty. Like they were full of things to kill each other. So nowhere in the fossil record do we see any kind of a sign of this like peace and love kind of thing. It's destruction and death. The fossil record is a record of death and suffering. That's the point. So then, where could the fossils be made? Do we know of an event that could have buried lots of animals and killed them, right? Well, we do in our timeline. We've got a global flood. And it's tempting to assume that all the fossils are made by Noah's flood. After all, it's a global catastrophe full of sediment, right? It's going to engulf everything that's alive. And that would make a lot of fossils. But I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think it made all the fossils. We'll get there. Before we do that, though, the first thing I want to talk to you about, since I've got you here, and you're captive, and you can't help it, okay? We need to first establish that the flood is what the Bible describes it as. Because you may not be aware of this, but there's a very large number of scholars that think that Noah's flood, if it was real at all, was not global. They think it was just a local flood. Many of them have this idea of this Black flood or Black Sea area flood, and they say that was what inspired Noah's flood. So how can we be certain that the Bible really does teach a global flood? Well, I am not the Hebrew scholar, so I'm not gonna. You can jump in on me if I say something wrong. But first thing I want to point out, if you read the text, look how many times all and every are used. It's kind of ridiculous. It keeps saying it over and over again, alternate between the words, almost like he wants you to understand that it's everything, right? I heard Andrew Snelling talk about this one time, and he said, it's hard to imagine Moses could have been clearer. Like he was trying to be explicitly clear. You know, it's like when I talk to my kids and I'm like, you need to clean your room, which is to say clean your room right now, which is to say not later, but right now, right? Like I'm trying to really emphasize this, okay? Remember that the point of the flood was to destroy all of humankind. So if there were people in other parts of the world, it needs to get them, okay? We'll come back to that in just a minute. But I want you to just do some basic thinking about the flood narrative. Like for instance, if the flood was not global, why would you bother taking animals? Okay, now you might think, oh, you can just take, maybe it's just the domestic animals they need to take. Okay, but if you actually read the text, it talks about wild animals and birds, right? And birds can fly.
All right, I'm going to stop it there. It's pretty interesting. They just can't answer that question. I'm going to go on to something that it's easier for me just to put up on the screen, but a lot of these people, you won't actually realize who they are. So this is the world ranking of top ecology and evolution scientists 2022. Right, yep, okay. So this person, Ahmed Berkshire, PhD, is a chief data scientist. So he just collects data. That's great. And head of content for this paper. So basically on April 18th, 2022, research.com released its first edition of the annual ranking for top scientists in the area of ecology and evolution science. The list of leading scholars is designed to offer the academic community more visibility and exposure, like they need it, to the influential research contributions made by those at the forefront of ecology and evolution science. And we always saw the ecology thing under the Lenski, along with the textbooks. So more than 166,000 scientist profiles on Google Scholar. The key findings from most first edition taught. So this is what they're doing. So we have 367 of them here in the United States. United Kingdom, 130, Australia, 91, Sweden, 19. These are the leading ecology evolutionist scientists per country. Look at the United States. It's interesting because a lot of these places have free college. Is that interesting? Most of the European nations, free college. You don't have to pay for it. But here in the United States, where you have to pay for college, they're producing all these evolutionists. I think it has something to do with the cost of the textbooks and what they're learning. Institutions with the highest number of leading scientists. Institutions with the best ecology evolution. So these are the institutions. So Spanish National Research Council, I know a person that worked with them, and it's interesting. It's kind of like the NIH. It's interesting because this is all they do. They're working with scientists, and they're trying to come up with ways to make a chimera or some sort of it's like the United States NIH. Let's just put it that way. Then you have James Cook University, Stanford University, right here in California, right up there by San Francisco. Then you got University of California, Davis, which is just down the street in Davis, California. And then you have, Berkeley. Berkeley used to be higher, but it's very interesting when you look at all these researchers where they come from, the majority of them. But what happens with somebody who does very well at Stanford University or at Cal Berkeley or even at James Cook, they will then go to another college to teach, and then that's where they finish up their sciences. So yeah, you get your ecology and evolution degree online if you like. I mean, it only take you 5 seconds. Just say millions of years 100 times. Millions of years, millions of years. So here we go. Here's the index. Professor Carlos Duarte from the King Abdullah University of Science, Saudi Arabia. Oceania, Professor William F. Lawrence, and he's from James Cook University in Australia. Australia is very, they're not, they're very secular, very secular. Professor Philip M. Fernside, National Institute of the Amazonian Research. So, I mean, this list, these are the average number of citations for the top 1% of scientists is 119,230 against an average of 26,818 for all 1,000 scholars. The highest cited scientist is Tim A. McAllister from Agriculture and Agriculture eFood Canada. And that's interesting what they're doing to our foods. And this is what they're doing, trying to hybrid foods, trying to pump in nutrition, but the nutrition is synthetic and it doesn't mold with our bodies. So I thought I'd just bring that up. Those are those people that I showed. Those are your Pharisees. I'll go over it again. These are your Pharisees right here. This is what's directing the world. This is who people go to. These are the hidden names of the pandemic problem, who Fauci goes to find things. Now, Fauci thinks he's a god himself because he did play God for a whole 6 months, or actually 2 years. But when you have these type of people that do not care about human life, because human life, once somebody who isn't is a secularist. They just believe, okay, we're just going to become worm food. We are not going to have any judgment. There's no judgment at all. We just live our life to the fullest, live and let live. And if I make it to the top, well, screw all you, because I made it to the top and I'm the smartest guy, because it's all about pride. Isaiah chapter 14, I. And that's what Satan said. What he will do. Humble thyself in the sight of the Lord. So this is just amazing. All these guys. These are your Pharisees, Brother Timothy. Right here. And basically just go to the world ranking of topicology evolutionists. These are your Pharisees. The Dawkins and the Krauses, they've all retired. They're not doing anything anymore. All those guys from 10 years ago, they're not doing it. They're just the mouthpiece. They get paid to go to these engagements, sometimes $1 million to show up at an engagement, depending on where it's at. And they don't even fiddle around in the classroom anymore. They don't teach anything. They have assistants teach it. And these guys here used to be the assistants. For Europe, there's Professor Kevin Gaston from the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom. 161 H index. He's also listed as number 3 in the world ranking. So then you got number 4. This is just insane. So the ranking, the top evolutionists, they have a better imagination and a better reality than what? No, these guys are delving into the micro side of things, microbiology, all of those things, bringing it into the system to change people so that genders can be changed, and so that males can be females, and it's Sodom and Gomorrah on extra steroids. I don't even know how high it can go. We are living in Sodom and Gomorrah at this very moment. This is what's happening all across the world. It's not just in one country, it's in all countries. You have the trading of innocent children into the sex slave. You have people that are actually breeding children and not getting birth certificates. So they're having a doula at home give birth to them, or they're giving birth by themselves, so that they don't have to have a birth certificate and be registered at a hospital, so they can just sell them, because these people are invisible without a birth certificate. It's just fascinating to me, how this really is a dangerous world. And I'm not kidding. This stuff is just out of control. Actually knew somebody who worked for that clinic or the foundation in Spain. It's just insane. So I think they should wear pointy hats. I'll put that one up for sure. And I'm just astonished and this is why I waited till later, Brother Timothy. I'm astonished at these people, because it's all about how much they're making. Right? It's all about how much they're making. Research.com is actually a good site. So it goes through the countries, it goes through the scientists, the top scientists. And none of these names, nobody knows these names. I know the colleges, but I know nothing of these names. Gaston, Duarte, Lawrence. It's University of Minnesota. It's Reich. He's first on the list of leading scientists in that region with a high index of 184. It's also listed as number 1 in the world ranking. This guy's from the University of Minnesota. But we don't hear about him. We just don't hear about him. These are the guys that are coming up. They've been peer reviewed. Anything they submit now will be peer reviewed. They will not be knocked back on anything. They could say that it's okay to eat elephant feces because it's going to grow your heart so that it could expand more oxygen, and you can have a vitality life, a more vital life by eating elephant dung. These people could get away with saying that. And that's the shame of what we're going through right now. That is just the shame. So I'm going to bring myself back over here. Oh, I gotta tell you, that was exciting. Any thoughts or any questions, anybody? Something else you want to see? But those are the Pharisees. Yeah, and some do. They come up with all these things. All these ads that you see for these new techniques on how to grow muscle by not even working out, how to get more oxygen. Why is foot fungus still a problem in the United States of America? I think Crocs have a lot to do with it, to be honest with you. I mean, don't people like take care of their feet? How do you get toenail fungus, things like that? I understand if you're getting it one time because maybe you went out to the woods somewhere and it started raining and you had your tennis shoes on and that type of a thing. But what's going on in this world? Everything's upside down, inside out, because we're always learning, but never being, or gaining education, but never learning. It's just amazing. Yeah. So anyway, I think I'll end it there. Unless you guys have any questions or anything like that. Dana, are you still here? Anybody? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, I'm just at the hour mark, so that should be good for people to review. It's very short and simple. If you have any other questions about, how the school school textbooks is a total fraud. A lot of things are just like mashed potatoes. They're just smashed together and put into 2 covers on each side. And, they're teaching our kids nothing. So, all right. Appreciate that, Brother Timothy. Well, you guys have a great rest of your day, and try and make this a habit, and we'll see what we can do. I'll get better and better as I grow. It's just a thing with trying to get more people to bring me up, because apparently I'm not going to make a living off this. I'm just going to do what I need to do, and if that happens, then that happens. So have a great day, everybody. Peace out.